Well, Air India in its defense has spoken about the fact that there was no threat per se and that this is a routine procedure. To put down these questions on that particular form is actually right, and that there is no wrongdoing in that because these are basic questions to gauge the kind of compensation that needs to go out, and also how those who've been left behind, the grieving family, were dependent on those people, on those passengers who lost their lives in this tragic accident. That's what India has said, that we've not been insensitive. The compensation form is what we are talking about. Now, in fact, the family members of the victims were asked to fill out this questionnaire. The questions here were as follows that were flagged off by the lawyer of the kin of those who died in that horrific crash. Was the deceased passenger employed or self-employed? What was the occupation of the deceased passenger? State additional details about deceased's income. The person who's passed away, you have to tell us about the person's income. What was the name of their employer? Disclose the name, the address, the phone number of the deceased person's employer. More information is required regarding the employer, and that may be sought at a later stage, is what the questionnaire read. Appropriate documents may be called for a later date. Details of family members and if they are dependent on the passenger. Details to determine final compensation arising out of the passenger. I'm going to go straight across to Nalini, who's accessed this questionnaire for us. Nalini, tell us, what is the international convention on this? What do the laws really say? Are airlines supposed to ask these questions to the family members who've been left behind? And can they, on the basis of these answers that are being provided, gauge what the compensation would be? Nalini?
Well, Sneha, this exact same question we'd asked to Peter Neenan, whether or not this can actually be possible and what kind of details Air India requires, especially to give the advance payments. Now, quickly to understand this, Sneha, under the Montreal Convention, Air India is obligated to pay a certain amount of payment, which is, after being calculated, comes out to 1.8 crores Indian rupees to each family that has lost a loved one. A certain portion of this needs to be given as advance payment for the immediate expenses that the family requires, essentially for the funeral, any travel related costs, any accommodation related costs. So a certain portion has to be given as advance payment, which we're given to understand is the amount of 25 lakh rupees. Now this form, the families have been asked to sign this form for this advance payment to be dispensed to them. Now the problem with this form is, like Peter Neenan also pointed out, that right at the very top, it says that this is so that the advance payment can be made, and details shared in this form will also be used to determine the final compensation in the matter. So what the fear, and it's a legitimate fear that the families and the lawyers have, is that if they share the details of exactly how many family members were financially dependent on the deceased, what kind of a job the deceased had, then that might impact the final compensation that they might get. Because like Peter Neenan clarified, the advance payment has to be made by Air India. That is mandatory. It has to be the same for all passengers. There can be no variation in that. But that is not true for the final compensation. The final compensation can be decided on the basis of the facts and circumstances of each individual case, which is also why, Sneha, the lawyers are not keen on going ahead with a class action lawsuit, because what they're saying is that the compensation that each family will demand and that each family deserves is going to be dependent on their own individual circumstances. So it remains to be seen what happens once this matter actually officially reaches the court. There's no hurry for the lawyers to file a suit because they're essentially waiting for the details of the investigation to come out, because only then will the liability be able to be determined, whether the
Okay.
liability lies mainly with Air India or if there's also a manufacturer liability that lies with Boeing.
All right. I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. Nalini Sharma getting in those details and putting that story into perspective for us as far as the diktat from Air India on filling up that questionnaire is concerned. The victims' families are extremely upset about this move.